Hello, everybody. This is Sudha Jamthe, and this is the IoT Show. We have a very, very unique topic today. I say that for many topics, you know that, but we are going to talk about, can we quantify creativity? We have all these devices, IoT on us, inside us, all around us, and we are collecting data about us, our behaviors, our intent, so many things. Can we quantify creativity? What does that mean for innovation? My book series is IoT Disruption, so I talk a lot about IoT disruptions, disrupting different industries, disrupting society, our interaction with machines. But can we quantify it? Can we create creativity? And can we manage innovation? So I have a guest, Amit Pande. Hi, Amit.
Hi, Sudha.
So thank you for joining us today. So tell us a little bit about yourself more holistically, and then we'll, what brings you to this quantified self for creativity and innovation.
I'd be delighted to. First of all, thanks for having me on the show. I'm actually quite excited about all the work you're doing in IoT in every corner of the world. I've now worked in the enterprise technology industry for the past 12 years in various aspects of user experience and product and all of that. But specifically, the kinds of things that excite me are about how enterprise technologies can make our lives easier, make our lives more productive. And the hope is that they can make our lives a little bit more delightful as well. So those are some of the themes that I've covered in most of my career at companies like
enterprise technology to make our life delightful.
Yes,
that must be a new one.
I think we'll have to start with making it a SMART goal before making it a stretch goal. But those are some of the ideas that have excited me over the past 12 years at startups, at Oracle, at HP, places like that. I also am an aspiring graphic novel writer, and I find that those ideas and the ideas from my own podcast, which is called Enterprise Should Suck Less, have allowed me to think about enterprise more holistically. Today, however, the topic that I wanted to share with this audience is a topic that I went quite deep into 2 to 3 years ago when I was a Sloan Fellow at Stanford Business School, and I was thinking a lot about the areas where organizations struggle the most, and the areas that will be paramount to our future, not just as this country, but also every major country that is looking to create new economies and new jobs, and ways of thinking about the future. And that topic is creativity. So the thesis that I'd like to talk about
before we get started. So when you say creativity and innovation, are they one and the same, or do we want to get us to a common definition of what is creativity?
I think that's a great
in an enterprise setting, right? It's not general human creativity, right? You're talking about enterprise and creativity.
Yes, and I think that's actually a great place to start. That was literally the first index card I was thinking of yesterday about this. That the word creative has often been mistakenly assumed in popular culture as somebody does a painting, right? Somebody does a piece of graffiti. But really, if you think of it in an enterprise context, it's about something being novel as well as useful. So if you think about an idea or a new product that somebody has created, which is very novel, meaning that it's a different way of looking at things than in the past, but it's also extremely useful and broadly applicable. I think that's my definition of creativity in the enterprise context. In terms of the words creativity and innovation, you'll also find that the third word that often muddies the waters is the word intelligence. And honestly, the scholarly perspective on this is that the researchers who have made their PhDs in the field tend to think of creativity and intelligence as separate topics. But I really like, Bruce.
The common thinking is left brain, right brain, right? So you think a person is creative, they're more arty, they do things that are...
That's right. And that is actually, the more we do research, the more we find that notion is extremely misguided. In fact, I find that the practical notion of thinking of creativity as a form of intelligence, which is something that Bruce Nussbaum from Fast Code Design did this a couple of years ago, where he actually wrote a book called Creative Intelligence.
Yeah.
I find that this notion of rather than getting stuck in the semantics of creativity, the notion in the last few years is that let's talk about how to improve creativity. And I think the moment you get into that realm in an enterprise context, it starts becoming less about whether, say, a marketing team should be creative and an industrial task worker should not be creative. And you change the dialogue to saying that they should actually both be creative. But perhaps what being creative means for an industrial task worker or a business analyst or a marketing person or a CEO are different in their context, but they can all be more creative. We can all be more creative. And really, in many ways, that's the only answer to all of these endless debates about robots and automation, I think.
So especially tech industry is all about, innovation, right? So whatever they build, they actually make it obsolete and come up with something else. Like in 5 years, whatever they were selling would be something totally different, be it Google or Apple or anybody else. And they're always striving for that. And coming from corporate, from my experience, we always try to separate that out as these are the group of people who are going to run the business. These are existing products. They're going to provide support and they're going to make sure that it keeps making the same amount of money that it made the last year. And then this is the creative team or the innovation team, which is coming up with new stuff that is actually going to create new growth in business. They're going to create some new products or new kind of ways of doing business that would create extra growth. And we kind of separated that out. And there's no science to how you find out these are the creative people and, how bet on them and give them the budget and room to go do things. So coming back to quantifying things and everything with data from IoT, how do you even think we can quantify this? I mean, what is the starting point of quantifying this?
I think the starting point of quantifying this is to think of of creativity first of all as a system of things, not just as a person is one of the fundamental cognitive biases is the one that's called the correspondence bias, right? Which is this idea that we tend to believe that something that people do is more associated with their personality versus their situation.
Okay.
And what that means is that we like to believe that artists and marketing people are actually more creative by themselves, as their personality is more creative, versus a data scientist or a back-end engineer might be quote unquote less creative. But the reality is that if you think about creativity in a situational context, you can do, and this is where the quantified self movement becomes interesting, you can do a variety of things at the level of the individual, the team, the organization. You can do a variety of things at the level of the creative tools somebody uses, the creative process somebody uses. And if you put all of that together into a system of creativity, where I think we can move the needle on creativity is not just focusing on how a set of individuals can be more creative, but how everybody can be more creative. Because the research that we have on creativity proves that everybody can be creative through just simple stimuli. I'll give you one example, which is very interesting from music that we can probably both relate to. So if you remember the famous song, While My Guitar Gently Weeps by George Harrison, right? Famous song. Yeah. And you probably think, well, I'm sure he spent a lot of time thinking about it. How he thought about the song? He was at his mother's house, not quite timely since this was Mother's Day weekend. He was actually at his mother's house several decades ago. And he said, I'm going to write a song based on a phrase I find in the first book that I find in my mother's bookshelf. And he went to his mother's bookshelf and he picked up a book. He opened a page, and in that page, he saw the phrase "gently weeps." And that stuck an idea in his head. And then he made the song "While My Guitar Gently Weeps." So there's a lot of ways in which the ideas of combinatorics in computer science and the ideas of bringing in massive amounts of inputs into somebody's everyday process can make people more creative. I think we sort of have to unpack this and then talk a little bit about what are the dimensions of creativity. So if you think about it.
So I have a question. I'm just thinking I've been on the product side, I've been on the analytics side at eBay. And I find that when you're a product person, you're coming with new, like what you said, is delighting the customer in enterprise, but I've been more on the consumer side. So delighting the customer is creating the right experience, right? What kind of experience would we create in the product? And that is an innovation that a product team is going to sit and think about. Whereas the analytics team comes with, hey, this is how we could use this data, we could create this product experience, this would be better preferred by the customer, or this would create better engagement by the customer, or growth for the company in terms of dollars, right? So the both might be creative or innovative in the traditional sense that you're talking, but it is done differently. So especially on the analytics side, one of the things we would look at was, it is not just about what we think as good product feature that the customer would like, but we wanted it to be proved by data empirically that more customers prefer this path of going through the product than this path to go towards checkout. So my question is, can we quantify biases, right? Because there are inherent biases in each of us when we look at the data, even if that information is in front of us. So let's talk about quantifying biases, which also was a topic that was.
I think that's a great question, because at the core of being more creative, at the core of where the biases come from is language, right? When we use certain kinds of language to support somebody's idea or to squash it down, we are exhibiting a certain kind of bias. So let's take the simple example of the anchoring bias. What is the anchoring bias? The anchoring bias is that, if we start a conversation and I say that, it usually takes about 15 minutes to come up with a great idea, right? Now, in an entire audience, whether they believe it or not, that number is at the back of their heads.
Okay.
In fact, anchoring bias is one of the worst biases, because you can actually fool salespeople do this all the time, right? They will tell somebody that there are only 2 seats remaining, and now you're supposed to sort of feel this pressure. So so if you look at the anchoring bias, or if you look at the recency bias is that you're most likely to remember something that you heard just yesterday. So everybody that has been reading the news will remember something from 2 days ago, versus we forget everything from a week ago. One of the ways of
that is something that's applied in marketing all the time, right? So if you talk about even Mother's Day, all the marketing about Mother's Day, you remind the goodness of your mother, not any differences that you had with your mother, right? And then you tell them that they need to send flowers to the mother, then they're going to want to do that. And there are books written about this, with testing done on people, that they told them certain things and then they made them go pick certain numbers or show certain selection process, and they picked one which was based on the bias that was fed to them, right?
That's right. And I think biases cut both ways, right? Part of it is, in order to pay attention, you sometimes have to play up on people's biases.
Yep.
But if you're in a closed room with 10 people and you're doing what people call quote unquote brainstorming, the reason why it's so important to be aware of those biases is because the reality is that 90% of all brainstorming is a complete waste of time. And the reason is that, the creative research shows that the ideas that you get in the first half an hour are probably the ideas you should just throw away. In fact, if you actually look at some of the most amazing creative people, whether it's inventors, entrepreneurs, dancers, they will tell you that they will spend hours on just getting into that flow of initial ideas, and they'll say, now let me throw this away. Now I have one nugget. Jazz musicians do this all the time, right? They will practice for an hour to get 3 notes that then will feed that song. So the way I think about our conference rooms or our mobile applications or these smart sensors in our environment helping us with this is that ultimately, if I say phrases like, why don't we do that thing that other group did last year? Then essentially what I'm saying is, I'm taking an idea from a different context and applying it. But as long as I'm aware that there is a certain bias at play here, and if I say, oh, you know what, 2 days ago I saw this article, and in this article something happened, and everybody else doesn't have an idea, then the loudest idea often wins, right? And so if we're aware of our biases, I think we can be much more open during the convergent phase of creativity. You have to remember that all creativity and innovation goes through that converge phase and the diverge phase, right? And I think that the biases that happen in the diverge phase are actually the most dangerous. Because in the diverge phase, you just want people to the best definition of a good idea is an idea that makes you feel good about moving forward with that idea. So what I mean is that if I give you an idea and you can build upon that idea, that's a great idea. Because in the diverge phase, we want hundreds and thousands of ideas.
But here's my thing, coming back to enterprise, right? So I'm going back to my own experience, right? So I was sitting in the mobile team at eBay, and we're looking at a lot of different data that's provided by the analysts saying, hey, we should go create this kind of product experience over this other kind of products experience, because data shows customers prefer this. This is going to delight the customers, and it's going to be good for business. But there is a lot of bias in here. In when you talk of bias, I'm just thinking, if I'm presenting this and having this conversation in North America, they have especially sitting here in Silicon Valley, they have a bias towards iPhones, right?
That's right.
And the same conversation when I'm having with somebody in Germany, right? The head of BU for Germany sees that growth is coming from Android. So then they would not want, an experience that is being, skewed towards an iPhone. And we say, hey, finger touch on iPhone, and we want to do this, versus something else on an Android experience. And their inherent bias kicks in, and the same conversation, whether it is presented to this person or that person, is presented differently based on who is trying to sell that point. So,
That's right.
So that is where I find that when you try to quantify it, how do you quantify it? How would you?
I think so. Before you even quantify it, I think one approach that can help in this diverge process is that you just present different kinds of data. So, for example, if you have actual product usage data, but you also have ethnographic data, you have competitive data. What you're doing already is, and I'm sure this is exactly what you did in your work, is that you're presenting multiple kinds of data. And in this diverge process, when you're trying to be really creative about that one insight that should go into a product as a feature or as an experience, that really helps. It's also important to know that at some point, the creative process is most efficient when you then know when to start converging. And it seems like from your data perspective, then what would happen in, say, Germany versus in the US is that you're maybe selecting a different set of data. But ultimately, as long as you're aware that there was a certain bias as long as you know what your bias is, that already makes the world a lot better. Because if you say that my bias is that my users are not going to use touch phones and they're going to use feature phones, and then you go with that bias, and if it doesn't work out, at least you know where that came from. I think the biggest problem in our corporate decision-making cycles in large companies is that we actually don't have a way to trace back to an idea and say that, oh, you know what, I now know who took that bad decision. So from a quantification perspective, I would say that, if you think about, there is no grand unified theory of creativity yet. And I don't think that will exist for many years. But what can help us is quantifying small decisions every day. So if you say that, we are in a group right now, and we are saying that we are aware that we are making this decision based on a bias of information we just got last month, versus information that we got last year, then at least we're aware that we've had this recency bias in our discussion, and that's the bias that we're going forward with. The reason why it's possible to quantify this today is because there are already dozens of apps that allow you to record everything that you speak into your phone. And into your smart device, or into your headgear, or whatever else we'll wear in the future. So if we are able to mine even the words that we speak, and if at the end of the day your phone can kind of tell you that by the way, Sudha does not have any anchoring bias, but Sudha may have recency bias, but Amit on the other hand has some kind of hindsight bias, meaning I believe that I can always explain what happened in the past once it's happened. Or one of the worst forms of biases, which teams can easily measure today, is in-group bias, right? In-group bias is the loudest person in the room, right? And we jump onto that bandwagon. The moment 3 people say it's a good idea, the 4th person finds it very hard to sort of go against it. even if you anonymize that data and measure it without saying that, this person or this person has that bias, I think for a CEO or for decision makers, it can be tremendously helpful to know that when people go into a meeting room, these are the kinds of biases that are affecting your daily decisions in your organization.
So are you saying we can take our own voice recording from the past and do some kind of data mining and actually understand our own biases? Quantify my bias, I don't know. I'm just saying iPhone versus Android. That was an easy example for us, right? But I'm sure I have a lot of biases and I'm not even aware. So one of my favorite authors is Fred Kaufman, about unconscious business, and he talks about unconscious biases in the company, right? So one favorite quote from him is, people always try to say when another person says something that is their opinion, when they say something, it's a fact. And so how do you deal with it? That's how, by default people operate, in a company.
I think that you bring up a fantastic point, which is the idea of the individual versus the idea of the team. In fact, both from a biases perspective or from a creativity perspective, what is interesting is that your peers' feedback on your idea may actually be a lot more useful than your manager's feedback on your idea, because peers tend to operate at the same level of competence. And in biases as well, before you can say that person X has this bias, I think at an aggregate level, if you know that there are some biases that exist in a team, even that data is helpful, because then as a team you can sit back and say, wow, we have this bias, and then every individual can make that decision.
So that is something, right? When we are talking at a very abstract level today,
No, I'll give you an example. This is a real example. Bridgewater Associates, the famous hedge fund, what they did was, this is this whole space of people analytics. What they did was they had, so it's a trading floor. Okay, imagine a trading floor, intense trading floor where there are 7 different teams that are trading billions of dollars every day. What they wanted to find out is which teams are more effective than others and why. Now, you can't get people to wear badges which record them, because that's kind of, it gets Orwellian very fast. What they did was they just put sensors in their environment to not measure individuals' names, but at least measure the interactions between players in a team. And you know what they found? It was just, the data was shocking. They found that the teams, of the 7 teams or 8 teams, the one team where everybody interacted the most, so everybody in that team had like an equal voice. I think Google studies have shown the same thing, that a team where everybody has a voice tends to significantly outperform a team where there is this, one grandmaster, and others just follow the instructions. So so what they did was they used that data, but the data was anonymized. They didn't say that, John speaks more than Jin. They said this team just tends to have a higher volume of interactions. Now, think about today's conference room. Cisco and everybody else is trying to make all those dumb devices in conference rooms a lot smarter. So, in a conference room, it's not just going to be enough for me and you to walk in with a Mac and start projecting. I think our environments in conference rooms are trying to get a little smarter. If you can even ambiently measure that, oh my God, in this particular team, this one guy or gal hogs 95% of the bandwidth, somebody needs to do something about that, because that's actually really bad for the team's creativity. And so I think that the way we'll peel the onion on creativity slowly is that we'll provide some ways in which the conference room can be a little smarter. And then the most powerful device we already have is in our pockets. The example you gave, which is if we can actually record ourselves in a meeting, just ourselves, and then use apps which tell us that, there are these 3 biases you have no idea. And maybe you record it over a period of a few weeks so that it's, it's a consistent data set. I think those are the beginnings of knowing what's inhibiting your creativity.
It doesn't even have to be recording. I know there are some companies who are using machine learning and artificial intelligence to transcribe their meeting minutes. So there's basically this algorithm that is listening in and taking notes and just converting the voice to text and sending meeting minutes. But instead, they could actually, see the pattern of, whose voice it was, tone of the voice, and
Absolutely.
whether too many people spoke or less people spoke and things like that.
So if the two of us are in a meeting room, right, and we're with 7 other people, now what you're saying is you can take that as output and feed it into a smart program. The other side of this question is, what do you feed into people to make them more creative? And the research on this is amazing. So that if they say that a little bit of humor, a little bit of diverse input, meaning that even if you go around in a room, and this is why I think visual cultures which
Yeah.
have a lot of just inputs and stimuli around them,
Yeah.
whether it's posters or whether it's comic books or whatever it is, it's amazing because the great ideas can be sparked from anywhere. So literally this idea that putting people into a relaxed state, putting people into the right kind of mood is the best thing you can do to make them more creative. In fact, if you put them in a chair and say be more creative, that's the worst thing you can do, because that's not the way the brain works. But if you have that environment where there's a little bit of humor, positive affect, and a little bit of even music seems to have a very strong positive correlation to creativity. In the age of big data, it's not very difficult to run these experiments. I would wager that if HR departments actually thought about this as a series of A/B experiments, rather than saying, "Oh my God, we're going to blow up like what is that story, the $100,000 Chrome Panda at the Dropbox office?" you know, Instead of that, you should just color every room a different color, make one blue, make one red, make one green, and then actually try to see which one of those works. I think the research actually shows that.
Marketing has done that, right? You change the colors and how people behave, or you change the music and how people behave. There's some research that's going on with music and wearables. So we all have our wearables, and we do our exercise, and some of us do well, and some of us don't meet our quota each day of whatever steps we decide to walk or jog. But they are actually researching, and we just wear a headset and run, while jogging. You just listen to music, but they're looking to see whether that music has an impact on you doing your exercise consistently, or you doing more, and whether how it helps. I mean, is there a causal effect of music?
The example you mentioned is fantastic, because when you're at the end of your run, everything again out there proves that when you're out for a run or any kind of other physical activity like that, your brain starts generating these alpha waves. You're in a much better spot, mentally and emotionally. Now imagine every great creative person in the history of time has always had a set of working ideas at the back of their head, right? Like, I'm sure when you were writing all your books, the ideas were swirling in your head. Now, when you're just coming off that run, those 5 minutes are actually worth their weight in gold. Now, in those 5 minutes, if a little bot pops up on your phone and says, "Hey, would you like me to capture any idea that you have right now about something?" And you're like, "Oh yeah, I was just thinking when I was running that there's some observation you made about birds." Now, you just want that captured. Half of the problem in creativity is it's not you need a much bigger set of ideas. It's a classic big data question, right? You need a bigger set of ideas to get down to a smaller set of ideas. And this is why I think we're in this enlightened age where if we actually think about this in terms of not just how creativity happens or innovation happens in a conference room, but how you might, as a CEO, get great ideas when you're in your car, when you're jogging, then I think we're actually entering an era where everybody can start being a little bit more creative every day. And ultimately, and going back full circle to the starting of a conversation on creativity and innovation, see, the enterprise innovation management space, companies like Spigot and all of these other companies, I think they've done a fantastic job of saying that, look, this is the number of ideas, and then you put some kind of dollar value, and then you converge them, and then you take some of them and you develop those further.
Yeah, we did that. We used that in PayPal.
Where creativity, I think, comes in is, what is it that's feeding the beginning of this process? What's the top of the funnel? And I think what being more creative in an enterprise sense does, which none of the tools today do, is that you just bring in way more ideas into the beginning of the funnel. Because the hardest thing about these things, like even with hack days sometimes, right, which is why hack days are being reimagined, is that if you have a very small funnel of ideas, your output's going to be no different in the innovation process than it is in the everyday process. So this is why I think that we're at this point where we can do a lot more of this today. Would you call this? I don't even know where this would fall in from a space perspective, but I think that there will be mobile app solutions for this. There will be some Internet of Things solutions for this. Once we start wearing glasses, I know right now glasses are not in vogue. They're only in vogue in oil companies and warehouses where people are hidden from view. But in a couple of years, I think glasses will come back.
It might take a different form. You're talking about Google Glasses, but it will take a different form. I'm a believer. Yeah.
And imagine if you're walking down Mission Street and you see a beautiful piece of graffiti, and you just want to capture it, and it goes somewhere in your headspace, right? Then glasses will help us do that. So I think that we are in this golden era, and it's really just a question of what entrepreneurs can imagine and come up with.
So we are at the tail end of our segment. So I have one last question. So we spoke about biases and quantifying creativity in so many different forms for the enterprise. So what do you think individuals can do now after listening to this when they go back to work, when they go back into their work environment, especially the quantifying aspect of it? What do you think people can do? Do you have one piece of advice before we wrap up the show?
My one piece of advice, which is something I've been trying to do a little bit more of as well recently, is to take 10 minutes of your day and write, write with a pen and paper, because
I don't write with a pen and paper, but yeah, I do write.
Because the research shows, Sudha, that when you write with a pen and paper and you just write for 10 minutes at the beginning of a day or the end of a day, it triggers a different part of our brain. Versus when we type, it triggers a different part of our brain. So I would say that even if you want to start being more creative, first of all, don't believe any of this nonsense that some people are more creative than others. Everyone has innate creativity in them. And I think the goal would be that robots take on more and more of those tasks that involve like passing a file from one person to the other, and we all
repetitive. That's the belief, right? When you talk about drones and robots, they can do the repetitive work. So I'm a fan of that, because then it frees us to do the more fun work. But what is it and how do we do it? And if we can quantify it and be more deliberate about it, that is more interesting for me. And that was my motivation for this topic.
Absolutely. So I would say the first is just, write. You don't have to get a fancy, what are those things called that designers often talk about, expensive Moleskine notebooks. You can just start with cheap, cards or your little notebook, but write a little bit every day. And the second piece of advice I want to give is find a partner in crime. A lot of, if you go down and read about the way creative people work, I just want to share one last example before we finish. This is a very famous dancer in the New York Met at an opera scene. Her name is Twyla Tharp, and she wrote a book called The Creative Habit. It has zero technology in it. Okay, it's a very analog book about the process of creativity. But this is someone that's done Broadway musicals and some of this. And what's amazing is when you read this, or you think about Edison, or you think about even James Cameron, or you think about even our great founders in Silicon Valley, there's always a team behind this. And so even finding one collaborator that you can develop your idea a little bit every day, I definitely encourage it. I personally benefited a lot from it.
Fantastic. So that's all the time we've got today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll be back again next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, have a good rest of the day.
And when you're watching this on YouTube, I usually don't say this, but I'm learning to say that click follow so you can find out as more videos show up. Thank you. Bye.